I'm Richard Ingram. There's Tony Privatera, right over there, the podcast master. Lafayette was commander of the Paris National Guard in Paris and also a member of the National Assembly, but most of his time was spent maintaining order in Paris. And here's an example of what angry women do. The women in Paris would go and shop for bread early in the morning. There was a little rumble that had been simmering because the harvest had been poor. Bread was in short supply. When it was available, it tended to be costly. And the women had been talking about this, and there were vocal women who were leaders amongst them. So these women were in the market at La Halle, and they were shopping, trying to get bread. And then when the bread makers said, "There's no bread," that was it. This was October the 5th, 1789. When the women heard that, they said, "This is it," to City Hall. So they went straight away to City Hall to talk with leadership about it. They broke in to City Hall, in fact, went up to the bells that were at City Hall, tocsin bells, and they rang those bells, which elicited people from all over Paris to come. It was an alarm sound. So in the Place de Grève, which was the big parking lot out front of the Hôtel de Ville, which was City Hall, by 8 o'clock, there were thousands of women out there. Lafayette arrived with his National Guard at about 9 o'clock. So Lafayette's take, his perspective on this was that he needed to have this crowd disperse before it got violent. Crowds do take on personality of their own. And sometimes there can be a point of no return where all of a sudden the crowd, it will become violent. And Lafayette recognized that. When the women broke in to City Hall, there were a bunch of men there, and they groused about, "We can't do anything about bread." It was another example of being tone deaf. This was a concern that these women had, not just women, it was families all over Paris, about getting food on the table. But these men groused about nothing we can do about that. And so the women said, "Fine, we're headed to Versailles. We will get the king to solve this." Well, Lafayette, number one, wanted to disperse the crowd. Number two, he did not want them going to Versailles. That could just generate more violence. So he found himself being in the position more of a diplomat than as commander of the National Guard. However, even his National Guard started the rumble. They were in support of the women. They wanted to go to Versailles. And in fact, Mike Duncan, in his book, Hero of Two Worlds, says that one of the men in the National Guard, Mercier, suggested to Lafayette that they go to Versailles and that Lafayette depose the king. That Lafayette replace the king with the king's son, and that Lafayette would be the regent for the son, and effectively Lafayette would be president. He would be king of France. That was the furthest thing from what Lafayette wanted to do. He did want a constitutional monarchy. He had no thought of deposing the king at all. So he tried to talk the women down. That was a no-go. Then he tried to talk his men down. That was a no-go. And then the rumble started in the National Guard. It's to Versailles or to the lamppost. This is where the crowd was taking on its own personality, and the crowd was willing to lynch anybody standing in their way, and Lafayette saw it. Lafayette tried to tread water a bit. He went in and talked with the leadership in City Hall, and they gave him a directive: lead the men to Versailles. So Lafayette was still nominally at least in charge. It didn't appear as though he were being pressured and pressed and forced to go to Versailles. So the women turned their attention to go to Versailles. This was the Women's March on Versailles, October the 5th, 1789. Those women had commandeered 2 cannons. You do not trifle with angry women. in charge of cannons. The women led the way to Versailles, and the National Guard following, Lafayette leading, and Lafayette just trying to keep violence count. October the 5th, 1789, the French Revolution was launched.